All right, we are on day 2. Hopefully you guys created your backgrounds last time. Maybe you added clouds, maybe you added a mountainscape. As you can see, I went through and kind of reworked my clouds a little bit, and I might still do that, but just try to build up the texture and the highlights from my light source on the underside of the clouds. Okay, so for today, you guys are going to be adding the foreground elements to your image. You may want to do a sketch for this if you're not sure. But basically, I have my background, I have my middle ground. I'm just going to be creating a third layer here in the front, which is closest to the viewer. You had a list of choices. You could add tree, a fence. You just needed to pick at least 2 things from the list, and then you could add any other elements you could come up with. So this was the little sketch I did in preparation for this. Nothing fancy, but hopefully helps you to see some of the basic shapes. So I have my mountain, I have my horizon here. I can see I'm going to add a little bit of a shoreline in my foreground. I'm going to have a tree over in the far left-hand corner, and it's very small, which would be unusual. If it was a normally foreground, it'd be bigger. But because I have this in my foreground, and it's an elevated scene, sort of a tower or lighthouse scene, this needs to be much bigger than the tree because this is going to be what's immediately in our foreground. Okay? So this is kind of what I'm counting as my fence. But this is what I've chosen to do, kind of a lighthouse sort of a thing, because I was really getting the water effect for this, like a stormy day at the water shore. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure I have my plate with my values on it. I'm going to just kind of use my sketch as my reference and work up some of my values and go ahead in there and start to paint. Everything I'm doing in my foreground can be a little bit darker at this point because it's closer, but you don't want to go too dark because then you're not going to have any areas to shade or change. So I'm going to have to go a little bit back and forth and figure out what's going to show up the best. So first I'm going to just kind of lightly create that little shoreline farthest down onto my paper. I'm using a very close to black right now. Okay, and I have my sketch right above me, which I'm following so that I can kind of keep that as my main direction. I'm now going to start to create the structure of the tower. So I'm going to go around my left side. I'm going to try and create these vertical lines and then these very diagonal lines that are pulling towards my bottom right hand corner there, just to kind of make it more dynamic and interesting. And you'll notice I'm really just blocking in shapes at this point. So I'm thinking of this as a tower, starting with the vertical edge of the tower, and then the top of it, it's built out of a cylinder. So I'm kind of imagining this as the circle, or the top part of my cylinder. Okay. So I have that there. This is kind of where I'm going with. I have it right here is this little area. This is the beginning of the base of the tower. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and use a lighter gray for the place that you would be able to stand on in my imaginary image here. I might go ahead and darken this at a later point. An easy way to think about this, I mean, if you try to make a tower, you're gonna have to first maybe study a cylinder shape a little bit, look up some images, but that's what I'm visualizing in my head, is the shape of a cylinder, and then adding the fence posts and other items over top of it. Also kind of like the tower of like a medieval castle or something would maybe be helpful. Kind of looking for that cylinder shape. So I have the surface and then I have the side wall, which is going to be a little bit darker because the top of the shape would be catching the light from the distance in my scene. Okay, and now I'm going to just begin to create the little fence post. And again, your scene might be totally different. Maybe in your foreground you have a house, and then you have more of a silhouette type of a thing where the house is mostly in black, and then you have some trees in the distance, and then maybe you have, you know, some action in there. Maybe someone's out cutting wood, playing with the dog, whatever you think would be happening in your scene. So as I'm painting these, I'm just trying to keep that very vertical motion so that I can get to these straight fence posts. Making sure they're coming out of my darker edge there, which would be this side of my tower, or the edge of my cylinder shape if it wasn't a tower. And I'm not really doing a lot of details because this is my thicker brush. I'm going to want to go in with my skinnier brush to do that. Just getting the basic chunky shape there. Okay. All right, so starting to have that feeling of the distance. This could also be a dock or something at this point. That could be another cool thing you could do with your foreground. Obviously, you can see it's much darker than the rest of my image, which helps to convey the idea of space and distance in our little eerie landscape scenes here. Now I'm going to go ahead and add the top part of my fence post there, the railing. Trying to keep that diagonal flow to the left, or sorry, not left, but right bottom side of my painting. Okay. I'm now going to need to pick up a smaller brush. You guys can find these in the high school painting drawer. I'm sure I probably already talked to you about that. But I'm going to use these to kind of get like the other side of my railing there. And because it's in the distance, I want it to be a little more fine-tuned. And this is what I'm doing here. If you can see me moving the brush, I'm just trying to imagine what's the most natural brush stroke. So I'm kind of going from what I have and visualizing where I want it to go next. And you'll see painters do that often. It's more just like you're practicing for the mark that you're gonna make. It kind of helps you to visualize where you want that next brush stroke to be without actually doing it, so you don't have to go back and change anything. Okay. So just rounding out this other side of the railing here. And this one's a little bit more oval than my sketch came out, but that's okay. It's still giving the same effect. Okay. Now, you might not choose to do people for your sketch. You might think it looks too complicated, and that's fine. I always like to draw people. That was always one of my favorite subjects that I would paint or draw. So for me, it's pretty natural. But even if you don't feel like you can draw people, if you look at my sketch, really, I'm just thinking of circles, rectangles, possibly ovals, and I'm gonna build those up as my first shapes here so you guys can see that. I'm gonna create a sort of medium gray here. Okay, so rounding out the kind of first person's head right here. I'm gonna have to see how well this shows up. It's showing up all right, but I feel like I need it to be a little bit darker in order for me to see what I'm doing. So now I've picked up and I've added a little bit more of the black to my gray. And at this point, I'm just making little block shapes. You can see this is almost kind of like a rectangle, a little bit narrower at the bottom. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and continue to paint downward. This is the legs. Since this person is standing inside of the railing here, I'm going to disappear behind the railing and then have the legs peeking back out at the window there. Okay, I'm gonna go in with my skinnier brush now. And just look at how all I'm gonna do for the arms here is I'm making an oval. And I'm gonna bring them down so her elbow is resting on the railing there. And then I'm gonna make another oval type shape, bringing her hand outward. And it's gonna rest kind of in the air there. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and use my dark paint here and just kind of separate the two legs so I can see I have two separate legs there. Making the foot is just sort of an oval, facing in the same direction that the head would be facing. Okay. I'm gonna take a little bit of black here and just darken the one side of her so I can see her a little bit better. Maybe bring her shoulder out here a little bit more. Again, if you look at this, it looks very much like the little mannequins that we would draw in a drawing class. And if you want to use a mannequin because you want to draw a person and you want to pose them and you want to reference that, that's totally a great idea. A lot of artists will have a mannequin just in their studio space. Okay, so I now have kind of created my basic shapes in the black. I'm gonna go in and add some other things later on. I'm gonna go ahead and get that little tree. So mostly for your foreground, you're just creating, you know, the shore or whatever the ground is that's closest to the viewer in your scene. And I'm mostly using black or dark grays at this point, and that really helps to add to the eerie sort of scene. I want this to be a willow tree, so you may notice I keep going back. What I'm doing is re-wetting my brush and adding more water to my black paint so that it flows and I can get that more of like weeping willow where it's curling and wrapping downward. Okay, I want to add a little bit more detail to my shore so I can take some straight black and maybe make a little bit of texture there. I think I am at some point going to add some waves crashing up on here. And so for that, I'm going to have to go up in my value scale a little bit and kind of go for like almost as white as the underside of the clouds there, really, in order for it to pop out. But I'm going to start with just a lighter gray. And thinking about how a wave would move, I'm going to make sort of choppy texture with my brush. Okay, and right now it's not totally white. I'm going to go back in and add a little bit more of areas where it could be more of a crisp white. And I'm going to take a little bit of white and maybe add some chop out in the water, just kind of making some horizontal marks. You don't want to overdo this, just kind of be very gentle with adding the white. If you get too much on there, wipe off your brush, super clean it, and then you can kind of smear. Because you don't want these to be thick. They should be like skinny little marks where there's just a little bit of chop as it's coming up towards the shore. The same idea would work if you were doing like hills or something. You just maybe wouldn't have them be so horizontal. Okay, I got a little bit into my tree there, so I just go back over that with a little bit of black paint. Okay, and so I'm just gonna kind of keep building this up, and hopefully you guys have some good ideas for getting started, and let me know if you have questions. Basically, you're gonna be working in your darker values for your foreground image of whatever's in your landscape.